Today I'm back in Crowden and we've left relatively blue skies in Hadfield and arrived at Crowden car park with a lift kindly today to save my legs. The clouds seem to be going a little greyer when we've reached here. How different the landscape and the weather can be just a few miles down the road. We're walking along Torside Reservoir today, the north side, and today I am with Liz Armstrong from Glossop Art Society, who I've discovered, Liz, that you don't meet in Glossop, you meet in Hadfield, in the very hall that the Platt family donated to Hadfield.
That's right, yes. We have quite a few groups meeting there. We have art group on a Thursday night and another group on a Wednesday and a portrait session on a Tuesday.
All these things. We're going to talk about the various different groups and who goes there, but the geese have joined us once again. We're walking down towards a sandbank, which I know has a gate to the left of us in a moment that says Nature Reserve. And we're just going to walk for probably about 20 minutes or so, turn around and come back and hope that we ride out the rain. A sanctuary, a wildlife sanctuary area, that's what it says. It's a strange little place, this, isn't it, where it's like the river, you really see the river bend, and it's like a bit of an oxbow, isn't it, where there's all different shapes of the river. And the Torside Reservoir we can see, which we'll reach in a moment, is just to the right side. And then the top of us, you really notice here, don't you, Liz, like the difference between the sandbank where we are, the shape of the river, the line of the trees. Well, let's keep walking. Today we have bought our sketch pads and we've also bought some pens. And Liz knows of a place where we may be able to sit down and do a little bit of sketching. What are those geese doing, Liz? Can you hear them?
They're making a lot of noise.
I can't place where they are because I've got a microphone and headphones. They're over on the sandbank in the distance.
Oh yes, there's three over there, I think.
What do you think they're saying? I do wonder that sometimes.
What are you doing here?
Get back, get back! We realised we were like the only car in Crowden car park, and we thought, is there something that everybody else knows that we don't? I mean, now we're just heading over a bridge and the water is... So one of the things we wanted to do today, as I have been exploring throughout this series, is looking at the landscape through different perspectives. And today I wanted to walk and see things through, an artist's perspective. Something that I've been dabbling in my spare time, just for fun. I've been learning how to oil paint, how to draw and sketch, as a way really to get away from screens, to get screen breaks. But I think once you kind of start delving into the world of, we were discussing different paint colours, weren't we, on the way here?
Yes.
And the biggest thing that I realised when I started going to paint, it's really windy, I do apologise if we blow out a few times. I realised that trees are not just green. That was the biggest thing that I learned. And then I think when you go and learn a new skill, like painting or drawing, you start to come into the world and see things different. Clouds as well, I've always thought. Clouds are so fascinating to stare at.
Trees are very interesting in the winter, I think, because they haven't got leaves and you can really see the shape of the tree very, very well, and the branches. Whereas when they've got leaves on, they're much more difficult to draw and paint, really. And the other thing about painting landscape is that it's huge and it tends to overwhelm you, like we've got this fantastic view at the moment. And it's a bit overwhelming. And I think you have to cut it down. You have to decide on a much smaller aspect and focus on it, possibly using a viewfinder, it's a little square that you can say, right, I'm just going to concentrate on that.
Yeah, I mean, see, water, I think, is particularly interesting. I remember having a conversation with another artist who lives in the Glossop area, Ghislaine Howard, and she was thinking about the movement of a piece.
Yes.
And I thought, how do you capture on a 2D image water moving? It's right now, it's just
moving slightly.
The wind is blowing the water towards us, isn't it?
The other thing is there's not very good light here today, So I don't think you'd want to paint here. I mean, you could sketch because it doesn't really matter, but the difference between light and dark is very important in painting, just like it is in photography. And really when you look at this, I'd be looking at the light bits straight away, thinking, right, which are the light bits that I really want to focus on, and how can I make them lighter by slight exaggeration of the dark bits, and vice versa. If you look at this bit over here, though, there are a lot of different shades of yellow ochre, all sorts of sienna. There's an awful lot of different colour, and the green is extremely bright.
I mean, even in the rocks in front of us, next to the water, there's elements of green, there's bits of grass, there's mould in there, there's moss, there's bits of lichen as well.
Yeah.
Winter, for me, I've really kind of been looking at it through different eyes, and winter has always been quite a colourless season, and now we're starting to move into spring. We're starting to see a bit more colour, a bit more green.
Very, very bright greens, yeah. Green is a very difficult colour to use, though. I mean, the other thing is to concentrate on something very tiny, like one of these areas here. These skeletons of the bracken are really lovely, really, really interesting shapes. So just to focus on that sort of thing, just take a tiny little picture of that. Focus on that can be a very interesting way of working in the winter.
Well, behind us there's a big patch of blue sky. We could just hope for the wind to calm down. And it's very interesting because in Hadfield there was no wind whatsoever, was there? It's like we're kind of walking through a wind tunnel here. You know what I think really interesting, Liz, is that when I was looking at the research of this area, I've often thought that this is a bit of a forgotten little jewel of a patch. And I found poetry, I found stories, I found photographs, I found engineering feats and history and books all about that. But one thing I didn't find, sorry, nearly tripped you up. One thing I didn't find was artwork. There really isn't very much out there in terms of paintings.
No,
I was amazed, and that is one of the things that we're hoping in the future to work together and change, isn't it? Encouraging members of the local community to come down and paint and capture. So
now I'm very interested in these lines of white on the water now. Can you see?
Yeah.
There are these streaks of white. I don't know quite what they are. It must be some sort of foam. But these are what people have been calling found lines. And I think they're really interesting. And you get a lot of movement in it as well. And that's another thing you want to find in painting is movement. As well as the contrast between light and dark, movement's very important, and tone. The tone of different colours is very important too. Right, I'm going to take a picture of those lines.
This is very, very windy.
The wind's getting up. Let's walk on a bit and get warmer.
Yeah. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to hit pause on recording and just get round the corner where we hope we might be out of a bit of this wind tunnel. We're a little bit further around and it's still windy, but we can really see the wind in the water here, Liz, because it's almost turning into waves, actually.
Little
That's how powerful it is.
Yeah.
You've been snapping away. What are some of the other things that you've spotted that are of interest to you?
Yes, particularly the shapes of these trees. I say silver birch trees. I used to think they were quite fragile, but they're very strong trees, and there's one that's been uprooted here. And another which is very, very twisted and covered with this lovely, very, very bright green moss.
It looks like velvet, doesn't it, really?
Yes.
I mean, trees are interesting, aren't they? Because when I first started painting, I did the classic thing of drawing all trees straight and up and in uniform. And of course, in reality, when you look here, they're different sizes.
Yes. These are very old trees. I mean, these are deciduous trees. They're very old, some of them.
Yeah, it looks like a very steep bank. I mean, you can hear the cars to the right of us, higher up, powering across the Woodhead Pass. Trees lining all the way.
The railway line, is it up there? The old railway line here?
Do you know, there could be. So to the right of us, it looks like a very flat bank. I'm intrigued. I might just climb up here, one-handed. Well, would you know, it's actually water. It's a bit of the river. and it's incredibly orange, really orange. Like, you can see the peat colours in that. I would not recommend coming up here though. I'm now going to love coming down because there are thorns all around. Good guess though, it could have been the railway line, although I don't think it came as far as here. I think it actually finished at the end of Torside Reservoir, where Hollands Hill is. There's a house there called the Hollands. So we can see the sailing boat is across the other way. We can see there are people wearing bright jackets. What's your opinion on drawing boats, Liz? Are you a fan?
Not really, no, because I know so little about them. I've never sailed, unfortunately, so I don't know very much about boats. So no, I have painted them sometimes because they're a lovely shape, very interesting shape. But I always feel I sort of lack knowledge about boats.
Do you think we're allowed? I don't know what the I'm not very good at like the terminology around boats. Are they boats? Are they yachts? I don't want to offend anyone exactly. At Torside Sailing Club.
Exactly, no, and I've never sailed there either.
But I imagine some people might look at this landscape, and when you take a photo or you try and sketch something, it can seem like it's quite thin and almost like panoramic. The view it's not from where we are. It's not very kind of high and things towering and powering over us. So then having these little details, like the colours of boats, say.
Well, I think from this distance, yes, I'd be happy to paint them because they are just interesting little shapes. And the masts are very interesting because they go straight up. So it's always good to have something vertical as well, especially contrasting it with the trees because they're all at a slant, these masts going up.
See, I guess we could come and do this same walk in a few months' time, and this would be a very different experience.
Very different.
There would probably, last summer there was next to no water in this reservoir at all, or you couldn't even see the stones and the bank of the stones. It was just mostly silt. So it was all these different colours of mud, basically, swirling round, and almost like someone had kind of put some cream in some soup. Now we can see on the right hand side what I climbed up to show you, the water. So I imagine this is the original River Etherow.
Yes.
Can you see what I mean about this orangey peat tone?
Yeah.
One of my favourite things to do is take photos of the water moving close up, and when I was in Crowdon last week I took some pictures of the moving brook, and I think when you take a snapshot of water when it's moving that fast, you get to really see all the different colours. And I was amazed that there were purples,
really,
there were greys, there were blues, there were oranges and reds.
Just in that small, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's when it's really changed my perspective walking about here in winter, that there is a lot more colour here if we choose to see it.
You can see these stones underneath here now, can't you? You can see some of the colours. These lovely shadows as well. You can see the reflections underneath, and the whirlpools as well.
Well, the reflections in the water, there are a bank of trees alongside us, and we can see even they're not straight in the water, are they? They're being bent and swirled in the water. You know, for people who may be listening to this podcast and be perhaps taking their dog out for a walk, and they've always wanted to dabble in sketching or drawing or a bit of painting, might just want to go down to the local stationery shop and buy a sketch pad and bring some pencils. What would you suggest they start on?
Well, everybody that starts off, like I did many years ago, use watercolour, but in fact watercolour is the most difficult medium to use. But I think initially just some pencils, not just an HB, but something a bit softer, B2, B3, that sort of thing, and a rubber if you do need it, and a sketch pad. If you're doing landscape, it's a good idea to have a sketch pad which is landscape orientated, because most landscapes are actually landscapes. So I would suggest And don't choose a sketchbook that's too big. Choose one that you can put in your bag, or even in your pocket, and have a little space where you can put your pencils. And I would leave watercolour for the moment because it is so difficult. Actually, it's a very difficult medium. It's beautiful, but it's difficult.
Build your ego up first.
Build your ego up, and if you can't draw very well, start with drawing. And the whole thing about drawing is that you have to look very, very carefully at what you're drawing. Really look very, very carefully and take time over it. When you get better, you can rush it a bit, but to start off with, you need to be very observant. And that's what's so good about painting, that it makes you more observant about everything in the end. So that everything is a greater pleasure, really, when you're out, because you've learnt to be more observant.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, you do start to view the world differently, and I've appreciated. And one of the ideas I got from Michael Howard, art historian, who also lives in Glossop, he likes to walk Kinder Scout a lot, take his dog for walks all the hills around there. And he has a little sketch pad which he takes with him, and he puts 10 minutes on the clock, and he sketches whatever's in front of him. And I too adopted that idea when I was on holiday in Scotland, actually, and I've continued it, where I've just, when I was waiting for ferries in Scotland, and would have this time which was nothing really, had nothing else to do other than see this view in front of me. And there was something for me that I quite enjoyed, having a deadline or a set time period, because it made me get on with it rather than be too much of a perfectionist, I've got to say.
Yeah, I mean, sketches don't have to be perfect by any means. They just have to give you a rough idea, really. And sometimes people just put they have a few coloured pencils, and they just put a note about the colours. That can help.
I suppose taking your time and focusing on one little bit, like for a while I was practising on trees and leaves, and then another time I was practising on rocks. Other times I've looked at water and the shapes in the water, finding maybe one little detail and focusing on that rather than going in.
That's really such a good idea, yeah. Because when you start to look at things in great detail, you can often see things which are underneath what you've seen first of all, and that can be very interesting too. Certainly patterns are important too, lines as well.
Well, we've turned a corner, and we are right opposite where the sailing club is, and we can already see the wind is sweeping in. I think this is a good time maybe for us to turn back. Let's head back toward, if we go around that corner, we may never make it back. We may be windswept away. So now we're going to walk the same path but the different direction. And I think this is always interesting, because now you get to see what you didn't see before.
Completely different views.
Different view altogether, where we can see the cars coming through, but in the distance.
And I'm much more aware of the clouds now.
Yeah. I'm trying to work out what that massive, looks like a waterfall. It's a man-made waterfall. It's one of the dams. I'm guessing it's where Torside and Woodhead meet. And Crowden Quarry is towering in the distance, like in front of us. And that's interesting because of all the different, it's such a unique landscape, the shapes of it. Just like something from Mars. It's quite hard to kind of think, when people talk about the dark peak versus the white peak, if there was ever one photo that we would take here that would tell the difference. The lovely pastured fields with cattle in, and beautiful like stone houses. And here, look how gnarly it is. I'm going to take a photo of that, sorry.
I think the other thing that's important about landscape is that everything is receding. So if you were painting it, everything would get lighter and lighter as you receded into the background. The foreground would be very strong, but the background would be lighter and lighter. So you can see there are sort of three layers there, can't you? There's the very dark layer at the end of the water, and then there's a little bit which is quite a lot paler, and then behind that there's something, a sort of hill which is even paler, and that's very important to get those shadings in, because they suggest that the whole thing is receding.
Well, we're going to have to navigate. There are two people walking towards us and their dog. I think we may have to tuck in here. The thing that surprised me was learning to paint from the back forwards. I don't know why. I found that so surprising. But if you are starting out in sketching or painting, hi there.
Hello. Hello.
Enjoy the wind. I found that, just really surprising to start with the sky or, with the hills, the shapes at the back, and then start to build up the detail as you go.
Yes. I mean, on the whole, the foreground tends to be much more detailed and much sharper and darker, and then as you go up to the sky, it gets lighter and lighter and less detail.
Well, something that you do every year, most years, I suppose. It's been a funny few years, hasn't it? Let's explain it that way. But Hadfield Art Show, I was aware of. I attended last year. Do you want to give a bit of a detail of what happens?
Hadfield, it's an open art show,
yep.
And the word open means that anybody can join. It's not a closed show for just a certain group of people. It's open to anybody. It's in Hadfield Hall on the upper floor, which is a very, very beautiful hall. And we've had it for 10, 11 years now. We have people from all over the place now come and exhibit their paintings. It's very cheap to put your paintings in. You can put 3 paintings in and it's only £3 a picture, which is very cheap. And the commission, if you sell, is 15%, which is again very reasonable these days. If you're interested, do look on Hadfield Hall website and scroll down to Art Show. And there's lots of information about the art show. And there's a registration form that you can print off as well.
And you know what, even if last year I was just going as a punter. I wanted to see what things were like, and I was amazed. I mean, even the children's exhibitions in the Craft Barn in Hadfield, a wonderful space run by Julia. The quality of some of the work, even from the children, was amazing. And there were hundreds of pieces exhibited. It was a wonderful time. I went back several times just because I felt like I didn't get a chance to see things. And one of the events that you did last year was the Pro Loco, which is how we first met. And Pro Loco is the Latin word for of the location. Have I got that right?
It's an Italian idea, I think. It comes from Italy and it means of the place, really. And it was a way that villages used to promote their villages, really. And they had these open air painting competitions when you had to paint a picture of the village on one particular day. So what we did last year was to have our first Hadfield Pro Loco. There's been Pro Locos, there's one in Hayfield every year still, and there used to be a lot more, but there had never been one in Hadfield. So we started it up last year, and so that's how I met Claire, who did very well.
Well, it was my first time painting outside ever. I learned a lot of lessons, not to sit where the wind is, because the canvas just lands on you. But I loved the idea that you could, people were able for that day to just walk around Hadfield and see people painting, drawing, just, places that often, when I live in Hadfield, I would walk past every day. But then having someone come from outside and...
I mean, Hadfield is full of interesting little corners, and the trail, obviously, the Longdendale trail is absolutely wonderful. So there was plenty of things you could choose to paint. So this year we're doing it again on Saturday, the 27th, and we'll be open from 8:30 in the morning. You have to have your piece of paper or your canvas or whatever stamped, which is proof that you're doing it that day in the open air, hopefully. And then you bring it back later on in the afternoon, and then we get visitors and residents to come in and vote for the best one, or for their favourite picture, and there will be prizes. So hope to see you then on the 27th.
Yeah, I have to say I was so nervous about entering because I don't consider myself an artist. I'm someone who's just playing with it really as a way in a busy life to have a break and to get out and see the world and learn a new skill. But I have to say it was one of the most fun days, and I had such a rush in thinking, wow, I created that. in 3 hours. I think when you push yourself out your comfort zone, and the point, I suppose, of people painting, drawing, sketching, sculpting, whatever they want to do as their art form, is that it's meant to encourage a sense of play and experiment, and so many things in life can be very uniform and routine and disciplined, and there's rules and regulations, but art at the heart of it is a chance to escape some of that.
Yes, I always feel it's like, I always thought about it like jumping in the sea, really. I'm never ever going to be bored by it, because there's so many things you can study and have a look at and do when you start becoming involved in art. So it is totally absorbing when you're doing it. And people think, oh, it must be nice to go out and do a little bit of sketching. But in fact, it's quite hard work, because your mind is constantly thinking about all these things, like the tone and the colour and the shape, etc. So yes, it's totally absorbing, and I found it absolutely wonderful.
So yeah, take some photos when you're next out on a walk. And
what to do now.
Exactly. Take the photos and then go home and get a cup of tea and maybe get out the wind and have a little play, or maybe pack a little sketch pad and some pens and take a break. One of my favourite ever holiday memories was when we used to have a caravan in Cornwall.
Yes.
Because I lived in the Midlands then, so it's a little bit of a shorter journey. And one of my favourite memories ever was sharing time with my mum with some coloured pencils.
Yes.
And a sketch pad. And we would just sit next to each other on the cliffs.
Yes.
And sketch the beach and the waves. And I don't know why, it's just always a memory that sticks out to me. And I hold that memory dear, because I think as a child you're encouraged to play more, but as an adult we sometimes get fearful that if we're not good at something we don't get started. And I suppose that's what, going to a class, for instance. I mean, the Glossop Art Society classes are open to anybody of all levels, and different classes and workshops that you do.
Yes, we do. We have Glossop Art Society actually meets every Thursday night. It isn't a teaching session. There's nobody going to teach you, but they're a very friendly group, and they're extremely generous about sharing their knowledge. And there are some very good artists there who have certainly helped me a great deal. And then on Wednesday in the afternoon there's another group that meets. They have another varied set of activities, a bit more of a teaching session possibly, and that's run by Annette.
Well, I'll certainly put links to all of this in our show notes if people are interested. And actually, just looking down here, I'm going to take a photo of this, because I like the way the path and the shape of the trees and the bank all join together. We're just at the foot of a rooted tree as well.
Yes, I mean that's. I think Claire's absolutely right. Very often you'll find there'll be a path in a landscape painting, and it's because it takes your eye in. It leads your eye in, and that's a very important point of view from the viewer, the person that's viewing the painting. They have an access to the painting straight away.
Well, we are about to go around Windy Corner again, so we may wrap this up. I think as it's been a bit windier than we thought, we won't sketch during the podcast, but we will go home with our cups of tea, yes, Liz, and we will do a couple of sketches and share them on our Longdendale Tales digital map. So do go visit that, longdendale.tales.co.uk. And if you are a visual person, I will just say, in case you're not watching this on YouTube, that if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the usual place you listen to your podcasts, then there are visualised versions of these podcasts by a brilliant chap called Owain. I'm not going to try and say his surname because I can't spell it, and I don't try to say things I can't spell. However, I would not do him justice, but his filming and cinematography that has visualised the podcast on YouTube is exceptional. So that could be another way for you to enjoy these podcasts if you wish. Liz, thank you so much for joining me on a very windy podcast. The sun is coming out as we approach Windy Corner. I think we should nickname it. They say that you can create your own map of places, so that is what we have done today. Hope you enjoyed listening to this new perspective of the reservoirs, and we'll continue our walk along Torside Reservoir back towards Crowden Car Park to get warm, get out the wind and stay dry. See you again.